Hello all, my name is Moses Namara from Clemson University, and on behalf of my co-authors Henry and Bart Knijnenburg, I'm here to present our research work on the effectiveness of adaptation presentation methods in improving user engagement and privacy protection on social network sites. Today, a number of users use social network sites to make a number of privacy decisions using the privacy controls or features on these sites. However, research finds that these users fail to use these features for a number of different reasons. For example, privacy decisions are difficult to make. Number two, users are at a time simply unaware about the privacy features and therefore struggle to find them. And number three, privacy protection is not the primary end user task on most of the social network sites. To help increase awareness and usage of privacy features, a number of privacy researchers have advocated for adaptive approaches that could help or that involve modeling user privacy preferences and automatically tailoring privacy settings to match the user's privacy preferences. So basically the idea being that we can learn about the user's behaviors or characteristics and use those to come up with models that we can then apply and help users either help users in their privacy decision making process, most especially in application of the privacy controls on most of these sites. Now, while a lot of work has really focused on the measurement and modeling aspects of these adaptive approaches, less work has really focused on how to really exactly adapt the system. So once we know of users' preferences, once we have models that we can apply to help bridge that gap, how then would we present to users these privacy adaptations? And so this is the major focus of this research work. Now, inspired by previous work that has proposed 3 adaptation presentation methods, number 1 being suggestions, which is basically saying once we learn of users' preferences and we have a model for them, we can suggest or we can proactively recommend a privacy action to the user using a suggestion. Or we can basically increase the visual prominence of a privacy feature to encourage the user to undertake a certain privacy action. Or, on the other hand, we can automate, which is basically we automatically apply the privacy feature, so the action of the privacy feature, without first requesting user permission, and just inform the user of the action that has been taken on their behalf by the system. Now, inspired by this work, we really wanted to examine 3 research questions. Number 1 being, which adaptation presentation methods of these 3 that were being proposed by prior work are really effective at improving user engagement with the privacy features? Number 2, based on their default application and user engagement patterns, which adaptation presentation methods offer better overall privacy protection outcomes? And number 3, which adaptation presentation method would users find most helpful? To do this, we set up an experiment that helped us answer these research questions. For this experiment, we developed a semi-working prototype of a social network site that we termed Friendbook, which was based off the user interface of the Facebook web application. Here we did this for 3 reasons. We developed our own prototype to, number 1, increase the realism and ecological validity of the experiment, and it also made it easy to apply and present the privacy adaptations depending on the experimental conditions, as we'll see in the next slides. And to really help drive the experiment, we had a scenario that invited the participants to imagine that they were looking for a job, and therefore they had to own this profile and also review and make certain privacy related decisions. When it came, so we had over 406 participants partake in this experimental study, but we had 8 experimental conditions. The first experimental condition was a baseline, was a default condition which served as our baseline condition. And in this particular condition, we basically did not have any adaptations applied at all. So there were no adaptations made in this particular condition. For the other conditions here where you see the all, we aimed to adapt 13 privacy features, which and based on these conditions from C2 to C5, we adapted them accordingly, irrespective of whether the user perception about the adaptation of that privacy feature was appropriate or not. So this was primarily guided by prior work that said, while we might apply these adaptation presentation methods, some of them might be awkward, and some of them users might find them having irreversible consequences if they were enacted without their consent or knowledge at all. So for C2 to C4, what we did was basically all the 13 privacy features were adapted to the user using one of the 3 adaptation presentation methods. So either we automated all the 13 privacy features, or we highlighted all the 13 privacy features, or we provided suggestions for all the 13 privacy features. In the tailored condition, we basically tailored the adaptation methods themselves. So based on how frequently users indicated they used the privacy feature, or how aware they were of the privacy feature. Specifically, the automation adaptation was applied to any privacy feature the participants used frequently or indicated using frequently on Facebook. The highlight adaptation was applied to any privacy feature the participant indicated to using only occasionally, and no adaptation was applied if the user had consciously decided not to use the privacy feature. That is to say, they were aware of the privacy feature but never used it, or used it only once and then abandoned it. And then suggestion adaptations were applied if the user was not aware of the feature itself. For C6 to C8, we basically then adapted these 13 privacy feature in accordance with the user perception about the appropriateness of the adaptation, whether it was awkward or irreversible, or resulted into an irreversible consequence. So that's how these 8 experimental conditions came up. Now, let me go to the results. In the experiment, we basically recorded the interactions of the users with the different privacy adaptations that they encountered or met, and subsequently, once they were done making their decisions, we also asked them about the helpfulness of the privacy adaptations depending on their conditions. Now, what we observed, or what we found, was that when we compared the baseline conditions against all the other conditions in terms of the engagement that we saw, so within these particular experimental conditions, participants had 5 actions that they could take. So they could either manually accept, which is the participant manually interacted with the privacy feature that was not adapted, or they rejected adaptation initially but then manually restricted their privacy after all. Or they could explicitly accept, which was the participant explicitly accepted the adaptation either by approving the suggestion, in this case if they met a suggestion, by clicking OK, engaging with the highlighted feature, or verifying the automated adaptation by clicking OK. or the implicitly accepted, which is the participant ignored an automated adaptation, thereby implicitly accepting it. Because remember, in this particular instance for automation, usually the feature was restricted to a higher privacy setting. Or they implicitly rejected, which is basically they either ignored the highlighted feature or the suggested adaptation, or simply didn't interact with the privacy feature at all, or explicitly rejected, which is basically the participant explicitly rejected the suggestion by clicking rather not, or the adaptation feature by clicking undo. And so what we found, we basically captured the different actions that they took under each of these conditions. And what we saw was that compared to the default condition where no adaptations were applied, we saw higher engagement patterns in conditions where adaptations were applied. Specifically, we saw a higher engagement rate when privacy suggestions were provided by a system. When we asked about the usefulness of the system depending on the condition, we found that the some suggestion condition, where there were some suggestions for some of the features, was perceived to be the most helpful compared to the default or compared to the non-condition. And the key takeaways were mainly two. Number one, automation of privacy settings toward stricter settings can help improve user privacy protection on social media sites. And number two, some privacy suggestions are an optimal way to help improve user engagement with available privacy features while also increasing privacy protection and perceived help. The key takeaway was basically, if applied correctly, we found that privacy suggestions had the most potential to really encourage users to actively own or take charge over their privacy based on their application and engagement with the privacy features. I would like to thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Thank you very much for attending this session.